January 6, 2016. Facebook changes the newsfeed algorithm. The update appears minor. Prioritize posts that generate reactions, comments, shares, engagement. Simple enough, except engagement doesn't mean interest. Engagement means emotion, and the strongest emotion is rage. Here's what that change meant in practice. Before January 2016, newsfeed showed posts chronologically. What your friends and pages posted appeared in order. After January 2016, newsfeed showed posts by engagement. What made people react appeared first. And here's what made people react: conflict, outrage, shock, not agreement, not information, not nuance, anger. This is where it turns. Because Facebook didn't invent polarization, Facebook weaponized it. The algorithm learned that divisive content kept users scrolling, so it showed more divisive content, which generated more engagement, which trained the algorithm to show even more divisive content. A self-reinforcing loop. And 2016 was the first presidential election where this loop ran at full capacity. June 29, 2016. Facebook announces another algorithm change. Building a better news feed. The update: prioritize posts from friends and family over posts from news publishers. Sounds reasonable, except it destroyed journalism's reach overnight. News organizations lost 50 to 80% of their Facebook traffic within months. And the space journalism vacated got filled with something else. User-generated content, memes, misinformation, rage posts, all of it optimized for engagement. None of it optimized for accuracy. Here's what this meant for the election. Traditional media couldn't break through. Professional journalism got buried in the feed, but viral lies traveled faster than truth. Pope Francis endorses Donald Trump. Never happened. 130,000 shares. Hillary Clinton sold weapons to ISIS. Never happened. 789,000 shares. Facebook's algorithm didn't distinguish between truth and fiction. It only measured engagement. And lies generate more engagement than truth, because truth is boring. Lies are shocking, and shock drives clicks. But this is where it gets worse. Facebook wasn't just amplifying misinformation. Facebook was selling access to your profile, your likes, your reactions, your behavior, to companies that wanted to manipulate you. 2014, 2 years before the election, Cambridge Analytica, a political consulting firm, pays Alexander Kogan, a Cambridge University researcher, to harvest Facebook data. Kogan creates an app called This Is Your Digital Life, a personality quiz. Simple, fun. 270,000 people take the quiz. And by taking the quiz, they unknowingly gave Cambridge Analytica access to their entire Facebook profile. And their friends' profiles? 87 million profiles harvested, without consent, without awareness. Here's what Cambridge Analytica did with that data. Built psychological profiles, identified personality types, mapped political vulnerabilities, then created targeted ads designed to exploit those vulnerabilities. Not generic campaign ads. Personalized messages crafted to trigger specific emotions and specific people based on their digital footprint. This wasn't advertising. This was psychological manipulation at scale. December 2015. Cambridge Analytica, hired by Ted Cruz's presidential campaign. The firm tests its micro-targeting system, identifies persuadable voters, floods them with tailored content. Cruz, a long-shot candidate, surges in polls. The system works. June 2016. Cruz campaign folds. Cambridge Analytica gets hired by someone else. Donald Trump's presidential campaign. And this is where the algorithm, the data harvesting, and the election converge. Trump's campaign worked side by side with Facebook, Alphabet, and Twitter representatives. Not unusual. Campaigns buy ads. Platforms sell ads. But Trump's campaign didn't just buy ads. They used Cambridge Analytica's psychological profiles, Facebook's engagement-optimized algorithm, and 17 million tweets mentioning Trump more than Clinton by orders of magnitude. The volume of attention became a feedback loop. Trump tweets something provocative. Media covers it. Social media explodes. Engagement spikes. Algorithm amplifies it. More people see it. Cycle repeats. Free media. Constant attention. Algorithmic prioritization. Clinton spent $1.4 billion on traditional advertising. Trump generated billions in free media coverage by exploiting the engagement economy. But here's the calculation that makes it permanent. Facebook's algorithm changes in 2016 prioritized two things: engagement and friends posts over news. That combination created echo chambers. Everyone saw content that confirmed their beliefs, nothing that challenged them. Liberal users saw anti-Trump content. Conservative users saw anti-Clinton content. No shared reality. No common set of facts. No overlap. Just two separate information ecosystems that radicalized in opposite directions. And the algorithm rewarded this, because engagement isn't agreement. Engagement is emotion. And nothing generates emotion like tribal warfare. Here's what nobody understood in real time. Facebook's algorithm wasn't neutral. It had preferences. It preferred conflict over consensus, outrage over information, virality over accuracy. And in 2016, that preference chose the president, not by rigging votes, by rigging attention. November 8th, 2016, Donald Trump wins the presidency. Analysts scrambled to explain it. Polls were wrong. Media missed it. Nobody saw it coming, except they did see it. They just looked at the wrong data. Traditional polls measured stated preferences, who people said they'd vote for. Social media measured revealed preferences, what people actually engaged with. And social media told the truth. Trump dominated engagement metrics from the start. Facebook interactions, Twitter mentions, Instagram comments. The algorithm knew Trump would win. Nobody believed the algorithm. And this is where it becomes irreversible. Because after November 2016, every campaign, every movement, every political actor learned the lesson. To win, you don't need truth. You need engagement. You don't need policy. You need emotion. You don't need facts. You need virality. The algorithm rewarded this behavior. And behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. 2016 didn't invent lying in politics. 2016 industrialized it. And the factory was Facebook. The workers were Cambridge Analytica. The product was your attention. And the customer was whoever could afford to manipulate you most effectively. Here's the cost. 87 million Facebook users had their data harvested without consent. Not for research, not for science, for political manipulation. Their likes, their posts, their friends, their behavior. All of it fed into an algorithm designed to identify psychological weaknesses and exploit them during an election. And when this became public in 2018, 2 years after the election, Facebook's response wasn't to fix the system. It was to ban Cambridge Analytica. The factory kept running. It just fired one contractor. This is what 2016 revealed. Democracy depends on informed voters making rational choices based on shared facts. But Facebook's algorithm doesn't optimize for informed voters. It optimizes for engaged users. And engaged users don't want facts. They want confirmation, outrage, tribal victory. The algorithm gave them what they wanted. And in doing so, it broke what democracy needed. The election ended November 8th, 2016. But the algorithm that decided it never stopped. It's still running. Still prioritizing engagement over accuracy. Emotion over information. Virality over truth. Every election since has been shaped by the same forces. The same feedback loops, the same echo chambers, the same weaponized attention. 2016 wasn't an anomaly. It was the new normal. And the algorithm ensured it would stay that way. Because here's what makes it permanent. Once platforms learn that rage generates profit, rage becomes the product. Once campaigns learn that manipulation wins elections, manipulation becomes the strategy. Once users learn that outrage feels like activism, outrage becomes the culture. And once the system locks in, there's no way to unlock it. Because everyone who benefits from the system has the power to protect it. And everyone harmed by the system lacks the power to change it. January 6, 2016. A minor algorithm update. Prioritize engagement. 10 months later, democracy fractured. Not by design, by incentive. The algorithm didn't care who won. It only cared that you kept scrolling. And you did. November 9th, 2016. The morning after the election. Half the country wakes up shocked. Not surprised, shocked. They didn't see it coming. Their news feeds told them Clinton would win by double digits. Their friends agreed. Their data confirmed it. And then reality arrived. Here's what they missed. They weren't living in the same reality as Trump voters. They were living in separate information ecosystems. Algorithmically curated, personalized, isolated. The technical term is filter bubble. The practical term is you only saw what the algorithm thought you wanted to see. And the algorithm thought you wanted confirmation. Not challenge, not diversity, not truth. Confirmation. This is where the mechanism becomes clear. Facebook's newsfeed didn't show you all posts from all your friends and all pages you followed. It showed you posts that generated engagement from people like you. If you're liberal, it showed you liberal posts. Because liberals engaged with liberal posts. If you're conservative, it showed you conservative posts. Because conservatives engaged with conservative posts. Not because Facebook programmed bias, because the algorithm optimized for engagement. And engagement happens when people see content they already agree with. The Wall Street Journal built a tool in 2016 to visualize this. The red feed and the blue feed, two separate Facebook news feeds, same country, same election, same platform, completely different information. The red feed showed pro-Trump stories, anti-Clinton stories, conservative narratives. The blue feed showed pro-Clinton stories, anti-Trump stories, liberal narratives. Almost zero overlap. And here's what makes it worse. Filter bubbles don't just show you different perspectives on the same facts. They show you different facts entirely. Red feed. FBI reopens investigation into Clinton emails. 700,000 shares. Blue feed. Trump accused of sexual assault by 12 women. 600,000 shares. Both true. Both important. But red feed users never saw the second story. Blue feed users never saw the first. Not because they chose to ignore it. Because the algorithm never showed it to them. Mid-2016. BuzzFeed media editor Craig Silverman notices something strange. A cluster of fake news websites, all registered in the same tiny town. Vels, Macedonia. Population 45,000. No political ideology, no agenda, just profit. Macedonian teenagers creating fake news stories designed to go viral on Facebook. Pope Francis endorses Donald Trump. Never happened. 130,000 shares. FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. Never happened. 560,000 shares. Pure fiction. Designed to generate clicks. Optimized for engagement. And Facebook's algorithm couldn't tell the difference between real news and fake news. It only measured engagement. And fake news generated more engagement than real news. Here's why. Real news is boring. Clinton proposes incremental tax reform. Fake news is shocking. Clinton sold weapons to ISIS. Real news requires reading, context, nuance. Fake news requires outrage, sharing, tribal signaling. The algorithm prioritized what kept people on the platform. And fake news kept people on the platform longer than real news. December 8th, 2016. 1 month after the election, Hillary Clinton gives a speech. The epidemic of malicious fake news and false propaganda that flooded social media over the past year. She's right, but she's also late. Because by December 2016, fake news had already done its work. Not by changing minds, by confirming biases. Here's the calculation that makes it irreversible. Filter bubbles don't create polarization. They calcify it. Before social media, you encountered opposing views by accident. At work, at family dinners, in newspapers that covered multiple perspectives. After 2016, you only encountered opposing views if the algorithm decided you should. And the algorithm almost never decided you should. Because exposing you to opposing views created discomfort, disengagement, less time on platform. And platforms survive by maximizing time on platform. So they stop showing you anything that might make you leave. But this is where it gets worse. Because filter bubbles don't just isolate you from opposing views. They radicalize you toward more extreme versions of your own views. A 2017 study tested this. Exposed social media users to opposing political content, forced them outside their filter bubbles. The result? Republicans became more conservative. Liberals showed almost no change. Exposure to opposing views didn't create understanding. It created defensiveness, backlash, deeper tribalism. The filter bubble wasn't just comfortable. It was protective. And breaking it felt like an attack. This is where the human cost becomes visible. 2016. 31% of Americans trusted mass media, the lowest level ever recorded. Not because media suddenly became less accurate, because social media convinced people that mainstream media was lying to them. Every story that contradicted their filter bubble felt like propaganda. Every fact that challenged their beliefs felt like manipulation. And the algorithm rewarded this suspicion. Because distrust generates engagement, outrage, shares, trust is boring. Distrust is viral. Here's what that meant in practice. Before 2016, Americans disagreed about solutions, but they agreed on facts. After 2016, Americans couldn't agree on facts, not because facts changed, because everyone lived in separate realities constructed by personalized algorithms that prioritized engagement over accuracy. You couldn't debate policy if you couldn't agree on what happened. And you couldn't agree on what happened if your algorithm showed you completely different information than your neighbor's algorithm. November 18, 2016. 10 days after the election, Wired magazine publishes an article. Your filter bubble is destroying democracy. The argument: democracy requires informed voters making decisions based on shared facts. But filter bubbles eliminate shared facts. Everyone sees personalized information optimized for their engagement, not for their education, not for their understanding, not for democratic decision-making, for their clicks. And this is where the moral imbalance becomes permanent. Facebook knew about filter bubbles years before 2016. The company's own research showed that algorithmic curation created echo chambers, reduced exposure to diverse viewpoints, increased polarization. They knew, and they didn't fix it, because fixing it meant reducing engagement, which meant reducing revenue. The choice was clear: democracy or profit. Facebook chose profit. March 2018, 2 years after the election. Cambridge Analytica scandal breaks. 87 million Facebook profiles harvested, used to create psychographic profiles, deployed to manipulate voters. But here's the detail that makes it worse. Cambridge Analytica didn't just use data to target voters. They used filter bubbles to amplify the targeting. They knew liberals would only see liberal content. Conservatives would only see conservative content. So they created different messages for different bubbles. Same campaign, same candidate. Completely different realities presented to different voters. And the filter bubble ensured voters never discovered the contradictions, because they never saw what voters in other bubbles were being told. This is what 2016 revealed about filter bubbles. They're not just inconvenient, they're not just biased, they're incompatible with democracy. Because democracy depends on voters making informed decisions based on shared reality. But filter bubbles eliminate shared reality. They replace it with personalized realities, algorithmically curated, engagement optimized, tribal. And once voters live in separate realities, democracy stops functioning. Not because voters are stupid, because voters are isolated. 2024. 8 years after 2016. Media trust, 31%. Same as 2016. Nothing improved. Nothing changed. Filter bubbles still exist. Algorithms still prioritize engagement. Echo chambers still radicalize users. The system that broke democracy in 2016 is still running, still isolating, still polarizing, still optimizing for profit over truth. Here's why it's permanent. Breaking filter bubbles requires platforms to show users content they don't want to see, which reduces engagement, which reduces revenue, which reduces stock price, which gets executives fired. So filter bubbles stay, not because they're good for democracy, because they're good for business. And here's what makes it irreversible. Once you've lived in a filter bubble long enough, you forget other realities exist. Your feed becomes your world. Your algorithm becomes your truth. Your bubble becomes your identity. And anyone outside your bubble becomes the enemy. Not because they're wrong, because they're other. December 2016. President-elect Trump tweets, "Any negative polls are fake news." He's not creating a new strategy. He's naming the strategy that won him the election. Distrust everything outside your bubble. Trust only what confirms your beliefs. Reject all contradiction as propaganda. And the filter bubble makes this possible. Because inside the bubble, Trump's claims feel true. Every story confirms them. Every post validates them. Every friend agrees. The algorithm constructed a reality where Trump was always right. And for voters inside that reality, he was. This is what filter bubbles cost, not just an election, but the shared reality required for democracy to function. Before 2016, Americans lived in the same country with different opinions. After 2016, Americans lived in different countries that happened to share geography. The red feed and the blue feed, separate realities. No common ground, no shared facts, just two tribes, algorithmically isolated, perpetually at war. And the algorithm that created this isolation never stopped running. It's still running now, still curating, still isolating, still replacing reality with personalized feeds designed to maximize engagement, not understanding, not unity, not truth. Engagement, because engagement is profitable, and profit is permanent. June 14, 2016. Pew Research Center publishes its annual State of the News Media Report. The headline, "Newspapers had their worst year since the recession. Circulation down 7%. Advertising revenue down 8%. Already in 2016, at least 400 journalists laid off. And the year was only half over." Here's the calculation that broke journalism. Newspaper advertising revenue peaked in 2000. $165 billion. 2016, $18 billion. A 91% decline in 16 years. Not slow decline, collapse. And digital advertising didn't replace what print lost. Digital made up 29% of newspaper advertising revenue in 2016. which means newspapers lost 71% of their print revenue and gained almost nothing back. And here's what that meant in human terms. From 2008 to 2017, newsrooms cut 27,000 jobs. 27,000 journalists, editors, photographers, fact-checkers, gone. Not because journalism became less important, because journalism became unprofitable. But this is where it gets worse. Because the collapse didn't hit all newsrooms equally. It destroyed local journalism first. From 1990 to 2014, nearly 300 newspapers closed. Most of them local, most of them small, most of them covering communities that had no other source of news. And when local newspapers disappeared, local accountability disappeared with them. No one covering city council meetings, no one investigating local corruption, no one reporting on school board decisions. Just silence. 2015 to 2016. At least 17 local news titles closed in the UK. 2016 to 2017. 30 more. 2017 to 2018. 43 more. And this pattern repeated across every developed country. Local journalism didn't adapt. It died. Here's why. Local newspapers survived on two revenue streams: subscriptions and advertising. Subscriptions declined because readers went digital, and digital subscriptions generated far less revenue than print. Advertising collapsed because advertisers went to Facebook and Google, platforms that could target specific users with precision local newspapers couldn't match. By 2016, Facebook and Google captured 85% of all new digital advertising spending. Local newspapers got the remaining 15%, and 15% wasn't enough to keep the lights on. This is where the systemic failure becomes visible. Cable news thrived in 2016. Fox News, MSNBC, CNN. Combined profit increase, 29%. Combined newsroom spending increase, 9% to $2.1 billion. Same year, newspapers were cutting staff and closing bureaus. Cable news was hiring and expanding. Not because cable news did better journalism, because cable news did better entertainment. And here's the mechanism that made it permanent. Newspapers reported facts, investigations, context, depth. Cable news reported conflict, drama, outrage, spectacle. Newspapers optimized for accuracy. Cable news optimized for ratings. And in 2016, ratings won. Because platforms like Facebook rewarded engagement. And cable news clips generated more engagement than newspaper articles. So Facebook's algorithm promoted cable news and buried newspapers, not intentionally, but inevitably. June 29th, 2016. Facebook announces algorithm change. Prioritize posts from friends and family. Deprioritize posts from publishers. The stated goal, improve user experience. The actual result, destroy journalism's reach. News organizations lost 50 to 80% of their Facebook traffic within months. And Facebook traffic wasn't outshow. By 2016, 44% of Americans got news from Facebook. Losing Facebook meant losing half your audience overnight. Here's what that cost journalism. Before 2016, newspapers could publish an investigation and no readers would see it. After 2016, newspapers published investigations that algorithms buried, not because the journalism was bad, because the journalism wasn't engaging enough. A 5,000-word investigation into municipal corruption couldn't compete with a 3-sentence outrage post about the same corruption. The algorithm didn't distinguish between depth and emotion. It only measured engagement, and emotion always won. This is where the moral collapse becomes clear. Democracy depends on informed voters. Informed voters depend on professional journalism. Professional journalism depends on revenue. But Facebook and Google captured the revenue. And they weren't in the business of informing voters. They were in the business of maximizing engagement. And here's what makes it irreversible. Once advertisers learned they could target specific demographics on Facebook for pennies, they never went back to newspapers. Once readers learned they could get headlines for free on social media, they stopped paying for subscriptions. Once platforms learned that journalism was expensive and entertainment was cheap, they stopped prioritizing news. The incentives locked in, and journalism starved. 2016, election year. The year American democracy needed journalism most. And journalism was weaker than it had been in a century. Fewer reporters, smaller budgets, less investigative capacity. Cable news filled the gap with 24-hour election coverage. But cable news didn't investigate. It spectated. It covered Trump rallies like sporting events, aired empty podiums waiting for Trump to speak, turned political coverage into reality television. Because reality television generated ratings, and ratings generated revenue, and revenue was the only thing that mattered. Here's the calculation that changed democracy. Before 2016, journalists decided what was newsworthy. After 2016, algorithms decided what was newsworthy. And algorithms didn't care about importance, accuracy, context. Algorithms cared about clicks. So the news that reached voters wasn't the news they needed. It was the news that made them click. And what made them click wasn't truth. It was outrage, shock, tribal confirmation. But this is where it gets worse. Because as journalism weakened, misinformation strengthened. The space professional journalism vacated got filled by something else. Partisan blogs, conspiracy sites, propaganda disguised as news. And platforms couldn't tell the difference. Facebook's algorithm treated a New York Times investigation the same as a Macedonian fake news site. Both were just content. Both generated engagement. And engagement was all that mattered. This is what 2016 revealed about media. Trust in journalism, 32%. Trust in social media, lower. But reliance on social media, 44% of Americans. People didn't trust social media, but they used it anyway. Because social media was free, convenient, personalized, and journalism was expensive. Inconvenient, generalized. The inferior product won. Not because it was better, because it was cheaper and easier. And here's what makes it permanent. Once a generation stops paying for journalism, they never start. Millennials and Gen Z grew up with free news, social media feeds, algorithmic curation. Asking them to pay for subscriptions feels like asking them to pay for air. They don't understand why news costs money, because they've never lived in a world where news wasn't free. But news was never free. Someone always paid. Before social media, advertisers paid. And in exchange, newspapers maintained independence. After social media, platforms paid by promoting content that maximized engagement. And engagement maximizing content wasn't journalism. It was entertainment, outrage, misinformation. The price of free news was accurate news. 2016. 400 journalists laid off by June. By the end of the year, thousands more. And every journalist who lost their job was one fewer person investigating corruption, holding power accountable, reporting truth. Democracy doesn't collapse because voters become stupid. Democracy collapses because voters become uninformed. And voters become uninformed when journalism dies. This is where the human cost becomes permanent. Small-town America, rural communities, places with one local newspaper. That newspaper closes. No one replaces it. And suddenly, no one knows what the mayor is doing, what the police department is hiding, where the school budget is going. Power operates in darkness because the people who used to shine light on it were laid off. These places became news deserts, communities with no local news coverage. And once a community becomes a news desert, it rarely recovers because there's no business model to save it. Local journalism died because it wasn't profitable. And unprofitable things don't come back. Here's the calculation that makes it irreversible. Training a journalist takes years. Building a newsroom takes decades. Creating institutional trust takes generations. Destroying all three takes one algorithm change. And Facebook made that change in June 2016. Deprioritize publishers. Prioritize engagement. Journalism lost. Entertainment won, and democracy paid the price. November 8th, 2016. Election night. Cable news dominates coverage. 29% profit increase. Record viewership. Newspapers report results, but almost no one reads them. Because by 2016, cable news and social media had already decided what voters believed. Journalism's job was to investigate, inform, contextualize. But journalism no longer had the reach to do that job. The platforms controlled distribution. And the platforms weren't interested in journalism. They were interested in engagement. This is what 2016 revealed about power. Journalism used to be the fourth estate, a check on government, a watchdog for the public. But by 2016, journalism was dying, and nothing was replacing it. Cable news entertained. Social media engaged, but no one investigated. And here's what that meant for democracy. Politicians stopped fearing journalists. Because journalists no longer had the power to hold them accountable. Newsrooms were too small. Budgets were too thin. Reach was too limited. Politicians could lie. Journalists could fact-check. But the fact-checks reached a fraction of the audience the lies reached. Because algorithms didn't prioritize accuracy. They prioritized engagement. And lies were more engaging than corrections. 2017. Year after the election. More layoffs, more closures, more news deserts. 2018. More of the same. 2019. Nearly 3,000 journalists laid off in the first half of the year alone. 2020. Pandemic. Advertising collapses again. More newspapers close. 2023. Over 21,000 media jobs lost. Highest since the 2008 financial crisis. 2024, worse. The collapse that started before 2016 never stopped. It just accelerated. And here's why it's permanent. Facebook and Google captured the advertising revenue journalism needed to survive. They'll never give it back. Readers got used to free news. They'll never pay for it again. Platforms learned that journalism is expensive and entertainment is cheap. They'll never prioritize journalism again. This is what 2016 cost democracy, not an election, but the institution that makes informed elections possible. Journalism didn't lose in 2016 because it did bad work. Journalism lost because the platforms that controlled distribution chose engagement over accuracy. And democracy can't survive when entertainment replaces information. But that's what happened. And 10 years later, it's still happening. Because the algorithm that killed journalism in 2016 is still running. Still prioritizing engagement. Still burying depth. Still choosing entertainment over truth. And journalism is still dying. One newsroom at a time. One layoff at a time. One news desert at a time. Until there's nothing left to hold power accountable. And power operates without opposition. February 10th, 2016. Russia's Internet Research Agency sends internal instructions to its workers. The message is clear. Use any opportunity to criticize Hillary and the rest. Except Sanders and Trump. We support them. Not a suggestion, a directive. And the workers followed it. Here's what the Internet Research Agency was. A Russian company, funded by Yevgeny Prigozhin, an oligarch with direct ties to Vladimir Putin. Physical location, 55 Savashkina Street, St. Petersburg. Staff, hundreds of employees working 12-hour shifts. Job description, create fake American social media accounts, post divisive content, amplify political conflict. Interfere with American democracy. Not subtly, systematically. March 2016. Russian hackers launch cyber attacks against the Democratic National Committee. Target: computer systems, email accounts, opposition research files. The hackers work for two Russian intelligence services: GRU military intelligence and FSB domestic intelligence. Not criminals, government operators. This wasn't espionage. This was warfare. June 14th, 2016. DNC announces it has been hacked. Russian intelligence is blamed. The stolen material: thousands of emails, internal communications, campaign strategy documents. And here's where it becomes weaponized. The hackers didn't just steal the data. They released it July 22, 2016, 3 days before the Democratic National Convention. WikiLeaks publishes 20,000 DNC emails. The emails show DNC officials favoring Clinton over Bernie Sanders in the primary. Not illegal, but damaging. The timing is perfect. Maximum disruption, maximum embarrassment. DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigns the next day. The convention descends into chaos, exactly as designed. But this is where the mechanism becomes clear. Russian intelligence didn't just hack emails and hope for the best. They coordinated the release with social media manipulation. Internet research agency bots amplified the WikiLeaks story. Hashtags trended. Outrage spread. Real Americans shared the content. But bots initiated the spread. And platforms couldn't tell the difference. Because bots were designed to look like humans. Here's the scale. 2016 election. Twitter. 1 in 5 political tweets came from bots. Not 10%, 20%. 1 out of every 5 political conversations on Twitter was generated by automated accounts designed to manipulate perception. And the bots didn't just tweet randomly. They targeted swing states, amplified divisive content, suppressed voter turnout. April 2016. Internet research agency starts buying political ads on Facebook. Total spending: $100,000. Not a massive budget. But the ads weren't designed to persuade voters. They were designed to divide them. Here's what the ads looked like. Pro-Trump content targeting conservatives. Hillary for prison. Pro-Sanders content targeting progressives. Bernie was cheated. Pro-Black Lives Matter content targeting African Americans. Anti-immigrant content targeting white working-class voters. Anti-Muslim content. Pro-gun content. Anti-police content. Not one message. Dozens of contradictory messages. All designed to amplify existing divisions. And here's what makes it effective. The Internet Research Agency didn't create polarization. They exploited polarization that already existed. They found fracture lines in American society, and they pushed, not with new ideas, with amplified outrage. Every grievance, every resentment, every tribal conflict, the IRA found it, weaponized it, amplified it. This is where the human cost becomes visible. Facebook's internal estimate: 81 pages created by Internet Research Agency. Those pages reached 126 million Americans. Not exposed to. Potentially exposed to. 32 million Twitter users saw IRA content during the 2016 election. 1/3 of American Twitter users encountered Russian propaganda. And most of them never knew it was propaganda, because it looked like organic content from real Americans. But this is where it gets worse. The Internet Research Agency didn't just target one side. They targeted everyone. 30 Facebook pages specifically targeting African Americans, 1.2 million followers. 25 pages targeting right-wing audiences, 1.4 million followers. Pages supporting Trump, pages supporting Sanders, pages attacking Clinton, pages attacking police, pages defending police. The goal wasn't to elect Trump. The goal was chaos. June 4 through 26, 2016. 2 Internet Research Agency employees, Alexandra Krylova and Anna Bogusheva, travel to the United States. Purpose: intelligence gathering. They visit multiple states, take photos, collect information about American political geography. Not tourists, operatives. And when they return to Russia, they use that intelligence to geographically target ads. Swing states, contested districts, locations where narrow margins decided elections. The targeting wasn't random. It was surgical. Here's the calculation that made it work. Social media algorithms prioritize engagement. Russian propaganda was designed to maximize engagement. Therefore, social media algorithms amplified Russian propaganda. Not because platforms wanted to help Russia, because platforms couldn't distinguish between authentic outrage and manufactured outrage. Both generated clicks. Both kept users on the platform. Both increased advertising revenue. So the algorithm promoted both equally. July 31st, 2016. FBI sends agents to London to interview Australian diplomat Alexander Downer. Downer had met Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos months earlier. Papadopoulos told Downer that Russia had obtained damaging information about Hillary Clinton. The FBI opens an investigation, but the investigation stays secret until after the election, which means voters went to the polls without knowing that Russia was actively interfering. Not because the FBI didn't know. Because the FBI didn't tell anyone. September 5th, 2016. G20 Summit in Hangzhou, China. President Obama confronts Vladimir Putin about Russian cyber attacks. Obama tells Putin to stop. Putin explains Russia's stance on the issue. Translation: Putin doesn't stop because there are no consequences. And interference without consequences is just strategy. This is where the moral imbalance becomes permanent. Russia spent $100,000 on Facebook ads. They deployed hundreds of employees working 12-hour shifts creating fake content. They hacked American political organizations, stole private communications, released them strategically. They created bot networks that generated 20% of political conversation on Twitter. All of this was designed to interfere with American democracy. And it worked. But here's what makes it irreversible. The Internet Research Agency didn't invent the tactics. They discovered that social media platforms were vulnerable. And once that vulnerability was discovered, it couldn't be undiscovered. Every authoritarian regime, every hostile government, every bad actor learned the lesson. Social media can be weaponized. Algorithms can be exploited. Democracy can be hacked. February 16, 2018. 2 years after the Internet Research Agency directive, U.S. Justice Department indicts the Internet Research Agency and 13 Russian nationals. The indictment details the entire operation. The fake accounts, the targeted ads, the coordination with WikiLeaks. Too late to matter. The election was already over. Trump was already president, and the interference had already succeeded. Here's what the indictment revealed. Internet Research Agency employees posed as Americans, created fake identities, built audiences over years. They organized real political rallies, paid real Americans to attend, amplified real grievances. They didn't just post propaganda. They infiltrated American political conversation so thoroughly that real Americans couldn't distinguish between authentic activism and foreign manipulation. And that was the point. Once you can't tell what's real, everything becomes suspect. And once everything becomes suspect, democracy stops functioning. This is what 2016 revealed about vulnerability. Democracy depends on voters making informed decisions based on authentic information. But social media platforms created an environment where bots looked like humans, propaganda looked like news, foreign interference looked like grassroots activism, hostile governments looked like concerned citizens, and platforms had no way to distinguish between them because platforms didn't optimize for authenticity. They optimized for engagement. And here's what makes it permanent. Russia demonstrated that interfering in American elections was cheap, effective, and consequence-free. $100,000. Hundreds of employees. Millions of Americans reached. Return on investment. Chaos. Division. Weakened democracy. And the playbook became public. Every adversarial government now knows exactly how to exploit American social media. The vulnerability remains. The platforms remain. The incentives remain. Only the scale has increased. September 2017. 1 year after the election, Facebook finally admits that Russian operatives bought political ads during the campaign. $100,000 in ad spending. 25% geographically targeted to the United States. Facebook's chief security officer. The ads appeared to focus on amplifying divisive social and political messages across the ideological spectrum. Translation: Russia wasn't trying to help one candidate. Russia was trying to destroy American political cohesion, and it worked. Because social media platforms were built to amplify division, Russia just exploited what was already there. Here's the calculation voters couldn't see in 2016. When you saw a political post on Facebook, you assumed it came from a real person with real beliefs. But 1 in 5 posts came from bots. Some of those bots were Russian. Some amplified real grievances. Some invented fake scandals. And you couldn't tell the difference. Because the platform couldn't tell the difference. And the algorithm didn't care. It just promoted whatever generated engagement. Whether that engagement came from Americans or Russian intelligence operatives was irrelevant. This is what 2016 cost democracy. Not just an election, but the assumption that political conversation is authentic. Before 2016, you could disagree with your neighbor's politics, but you knew your neighbor was real. After 2016, you couldn't be sure the person you were arguing with online was even human. They might be a bot. They might be a foreign operative. They might be an algorithm designed to radicalize you. And that uncertainty poisoned all political discourse. Because once you can't trust that conversations are real, you can't have conversations. You can only have manipulation. And here's why it's permanent. Platforms learned after 2016 that foreign interference was a problem. They hired content moderators, banned some accounts, implemented better detection systems. But the fundamental vulnerability remains. Platforms still prioritize engagement. Bots still generate engagement. Foreign adversaries still create bots. And algorithms still can't reliably distinguish between authentic political passion and manufactured outrage. 2020 election. 4 years after 2016. More bots. More foreign interference. More manipulation. 2024 election. 8 years after 2016. Even more. The tactics that worked in 2016 never stopped working. They just scaled. Because the incentive structure never changed. Platforms still profit from engagement. Adversaries still exploit engagement. And democracy still suffers the consequences. February 10th, 2016. Internet Research Agency Directive. Criticize Hillary. Support Trump and Sanders. Amplify division. That directive never ended. The organization got indicted. Some employees got named. But the strategy became permanent because it was cheap, effective, and unpunishable. Russia interfered in American democracy, and the punishment was nothing. No consequences, no retaliation, no deterrent. Just indictments of people who would never face trial, and a playbook that every hostile government now follows. Because 2016 proved that democracies are vulnerable, and social media is the weapon. November 8th, 2016. 6:59 p.m. Eastern Time. First polls close. Indiana and Kentucky for Trump. Vermont for Clinton. Predictable. Expected. Exactly as the models projected. No surprises yet. 8 p.m. Clinton wins Massachusetts, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. Trump wins Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and South Carolina. Still predictable. Every cable network shows the same graphics. Clinton ahead in projected electoral votes. Path to 270 still clear. The data journalists remain confident. But this is where the night starts to turn. 9 p.m. Major battleground states remain uncalled. Florida, North Carolina, Ohio. Too close. Too many outstanding votes. Networks start hedging. Still early. A lot of votes left to count. Translation: the race is tighter than anyone predicted. 10:40 p.m. Clinton wins Virginia by a narrow margin. Virginia was supposed to be safe. Double-digit lead in polls. Campaign didn't worry about Virginia. She wins, but by less than expected. First sign the models are off. 10:50 p.m. The night breaks. Trump wins Florida. 29 electoral votes. Must-win state. Clinton needed Florida. She lost it. And suddenly, every projection shifts. Every path narrows. Cable news anchors recalculate. Political operatives panic. Social media explodes. Because without Florida, Clinton's options shrink dramatically. 11 p.m. Clinton wins California. 55 electoral votes. Expected. California was never in doubt. But California doesn't matter anymore. Because the race isn't being decided on the coasts. It's being decided in the Rust Belt. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. States Clinton assumed were safe. States that voted Democrat in every presidential election since 1988. States where industrial jobs disappeared. Factories closed. Communities hollowed out. And voters remembered. 12:02 a.m. Wednesday, November 9th. Trump wins Iowa. Another Obama state flips red. The pattern becomes undeniable. Working-class white voters in the Midwest are abandoning Democrats. Not slowly, catastrophically. 1:36 a.m. Pennsylvania falls. 20 electoral votes. Clinton needed Pennsylvania. It was supposed to be the firewall. Trump breaks through. And with Pennsylvania gone, the math becomes brutal. Clinton's path to 270 electoral votes requires winning nearly every remaining state. Trump just needs one more. 2 a.m. John Podesta, Clinton's campaign manager, takes the stage at Clinton headquarters. Several states are too close to call. We're not going to have anything more to say tonight. He doesn't concede, doesn't acknowledge defeat, just tells everyone to go home. Because the data team still thinks there's a path. There isn't. 2:29 a.m. Associated Press calls Wisconsin for Trump. That's it. 276 electoral votes. More than the 270 needed. Donald Trump wins the presidency. Against every prediction, against every poll, against every model. The candidate who had never held elected office. Who ran on grievance and disruption. Who broke every rule of modern campaigning, defeats the most qualified candidate in modern history. Here's the calculation nobody saw coming. Clinton wins the popular vote. 65,844,610 votes. Trump, 62,979,636 votes. Clinton wins by 2.1%, nearly 3 million votes. But the presidency isn't decided by popular vote. It's decided by the Electoral College. And the Electoral College rewards geography over population. Final Electoral College count. Trump, 304 votes. Clinton, 227 votes. 7 electors defect. Vote for someone other than their pledged candidate. Most faithless electors in over a century. But it doesn't matter. Trump wins decisively. Not because more Americans chose him, because the right Americans in the right states chose him. This is where the human cost becomes visible. White voters, 57% for Trump. White college-educated voters split. Trump 48%, Clinton 44%. White non-college voters, 66% for Trump. That's the divide. Education, not just race, not just economics. Voters with college degrees broke for Clinton. Voters without college degrees broke for Trump. And there are more voters without degrees. Gender split. Men, 52% Trump, 41% Clinton. Women, 54% Clinton, 41% Trump. Trump wins men decisively. Clinton wins women decisively. But the Electoral College doesn't care about gender gaps. It cares about states. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Trump's margin of victory in those 3 states combined, 77,000 votes. That's it. 77,000 voters out of 136 million total voters. 0.05% of the electorate decides the presidency. And here's what those 77,000 voters represented. Factory workers who lost jobs to automation and trade deals. Coal miners who watched their industry collapse. Small-town Americans who felt ignored by coastal elites. Rural communities where the economy never recovered from 2008. They didn't vote for Trump because they loved him. They voted for Trump because he acknowledged their existence. And Clinton didn't. But this is where the systemic failure becomes clear. Clinton's campaign spent $1.4 billion, hired the best data scientists, built the most sophisticated voter targeting system, ran the most professional operation in campaign history, and lost because all that data, all that sophistication, all that professionalism, optimized for the wrong things. Clinton's campaign focused on urban turnout, minority voters, college-educated suburbs. They assumed the Rust Belt was safe, didn't campaign heavily in Wisconsin, took Michigan for granted, spent the final weeks focused on Arizona and Georgia, states she lost anyway. Meanwhile, Trump campaigned in Pennsylvania, held rallies in Michigan, promised to bring back manufacturing jobs that were never coming back. And voters in those states believed him, not because the promises were credible, because someone finally made the promises. This is what 2016 revealed about democracy. Voters don't always choose rationally. They choose emotionally. Clinton offered competence, experience, steady leadership. Trump offered disruption, recognition, revenge against the system that failed them. Competence lost, disruption won. And here's what makes it permanent. The Electoral College system that delivered Trump's victory isn't changing, because changing it requires a constitutional amendment, which requires 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of state legislatures to agree. And the states that benefit from the current system have no incentive to change it. So future presidents will continue to be elected by narrow margins in swing states rather than national majorities. Geography will continue to matter more than population. And 77,000 voters in 3 states will continue to have more power than 3 million voters nationwide. November 9th, 2016. Morning after the election. Half the country wakes up shocked. The other half wakes up vindicated. But here's what both halves missed. The election didn't change the systems that produced Trump. The algorithm that amplified divisive content, still running. The filter bubbles that isolated voters in separate realities, still active. The journalism collapse that left voters uninformed, still accelerating. The foreign interference that exploited platform vulnerabilities, still operating. None of it stopped, because the election wasn't the disease. The election was the symptom. The disease was a democracy that had been systematically weakened by social media algorithms optimized for engagement over truth, data harvesting firms that turned voters into psychological profiles to be manipulated, platforms that couldn't distinguish between authentic political speech and foreign propaganda, a media ecosystem that rewarded outrage over information, an economic system that left entire communities behind and offered them no path forward. Trump didn't create any of this. Trump exploited all of it. And here's the calculation that makes it irreversible. Every political campaign since 2016 learned the same lesson. To win, you need social media dominance, not policy papers; emotional engagement, not rational arguments; tribal mobilization, not coalition building; algorithmic amplification, not traditional media coverage. The playbook that elected Trump became the template for every campaign after. Not because it's good for democracy, because it works. This is where the moral collapse becomes permanent. Democracy depends on informed voters making rational choices based on shared facts and common interests. But 2016 proved you can win without any of that. You don't need informed voters. You need engaged voters. You don't need rational arguments. You need emotional triggers. You don't need shared facts. You need personalized narratives. You don't need common interests. You need tribal identity. And once that playbook succeeds, it never goes away, because politics is competitive. If your opponent uses algorithmic manipulation and you use traditional campaigning, you lose. So everyone uses algorithmic manipulation. The race to the bottom becomes mandatory, not because politicians are evil, because the incentive structure rewards whoever exploits the system most effectively and punishes whoever tries to play fair. November 8, 2016. Donald Trump elected president. 304 electoral votes. 227 for Clinton. Popular vote, Clinton by 3 million. Doesn't matter. The system that determines who governs prioritized land over people, and the candidate who mastered algorithmic manipulation defeated the candidate who mastered traditional politics. But here's what the election didn't change. Facebook's algorithm, still prioritizing engagement. Cambridge Analytica's playbook, still available. Russian interference tactics, still effective. Filter bubbles, still isolating. Media collapse, still accelerating. Economic inequality, still widening. The election ended. The systems that produced it continued, because removing Trump from office doesn't fix what made Trump possible. The platforms remain. The algorithms remain. The incentives remain. And as long as those remain, democracy will continue electing whoever best exploits them. Not the best leader, the best manipulator. This is what 2016 cost. Not just one election, but the belief that democracy selects leaders based on merit, qualifications, or policy. 2016 proved democracy selects leaders based on who dominates the information environment. And the information environment is controlled by algorithms optimized for profit, not truth. 2:29 a.m., November 9th, 2016. Donald Trump elected President of the United States. The man who understood that attention is power, that outrage is currency, that algorithms don't distinguish between truth and lies, that democracy is just another system to be gamed. He won, not by changing the system, by exploiting it better than anyone else. And the system that enabled his victory is still running, still rewarding manipulation, still punishing honesty, still choosing engagement over democracy. Because the algorithm doesn't care who wins. It only cares that you keep watching. June 21st, 2016. 5 months before the election. Pew Research Center publishes a study, Partisanship and Political Animosity in 2016. The findings aren't surprising. They're catastrophic. For the first time since the study began in 1992, majorities in both parties hold not just unfavorable, but very unfavorable views of the opposing party. Not dislike, hatred. Here are the numbers. 55% of Democrats say the Republican Party makes them afraid. 49% of Republicans say the Democratic Party makes them afraid. Not frustrated, not annoyed, afraid. Fear of the opposing political party is now the dominant emotion in American politics. And this is where it gets worse. Among highly engaged voters, those who vote regularly and donate to campaigns, the numbers spike. 70% of politically engaged Democrats are afraid of Republicans. 62% of politically engaged Republicans are afraid of Democrats. The people most invested in democracy are the people most convinced the other side will destroy it. But fear isn't the only emotion. 45% of Republicans view Democratic policies as a threat to the nation's well-being. 41% of Democrats view Republican policies as a threat to the nation's well-being. Not just wrong, not just misguided, an existential threat. This is where the mechanism becomes clear. Before 2016, Americans disagreed on policy. After 2016, Americans believed the opposing party threatened the survival of the country. That's not a policy disagreement. That's tribal warfare. And here's what makes it irreversible. Once you believe the other side is a threat, compromise becomes betrayal. If Republicans are an existential threat, Democrats can't negotiate with them. If Democrats are an existential threat, Republicans can't cooperate with them. Compromise isn't pragmatism. It's surrender. And surrender to a threat is unacceptable. 2016 to 2020. 4 years. Americans rating their own party 45.9 points higher than the opposing party on average. Negative feelings toward the opposing party increased 4.8 points per decade since 1980. But here's the critical detail. The United States is polarizing faster than any comparable democracy. The data proves it. Canada, New Zealand, Switzerland all experienced rising polarization from 1980 to 2016, but less than the United States. United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, Norway, Sweden. Polarization decreased. Only America accelerated toward tribalism, while other democracies stabilized or recovered. Not because Americans are inherently more divided, because American social media algorithms amplify division more effectively. And this is where the human cost becomes visible. 2017. 8% of Democrats and 8% of Republicans agreed that political violence is at least a little justified to advance their party's agenda. September 2020, 33% of Democrats, 36% of Republicans. Political violence approval quadrupled in 3 years. Let that calculation settle. 1 in 3 Democrats believes violence is justified if it helps their party. 1 in 3 Republicans believes violence is justified if it helps their party. Democracy can't survive when 1/3 of voters are willing to use violence to get what they want. But that's where 2016 led. Not immediately, gradually. Each year after 2016, more Americans became willing to abandon democratic norms. This is where the systemic failure becomes permanent. Social media didn't just connect people, it radicalized them. 25 to 2016. Social media played a primary or secondary role in the radicalization of 55.3% of extremists, tracked by the profiles of individual radicalization in the United States database. More than half. But 2016 was different. In 2016 alone, social media factored into the radicalization of 93.18% of Islamist extremists, 88.23% of lone actor extremists, 76% of group-affiliated extremists. Social media went from being a tool used by some extremists to being the primary radicalization mechanism for nearly all extremists. And here's what makes it permanent. The radicalization pipeline doesn't require joining an extremist group anymore. It just requires scrolling. Algorithm shows you content that confirms your beliefs. You engage. Algorithm shows you more extreme versions. You engage again. Algorithm shows you even more extreme versions. Within months, you've been algorithmically radicalized without ever meeting another extremist. This is what 2016 revealed about social media. It doesn't just reflect polarization, it manufactures it. The algorithm identifies your political leaning. Then it feeds you increasingly extreme content. Because extreme content generates more engagement, and engagement generates revenue, A business model requires radicalization, not as a bug, as a feature. But this is where the generational damage becomes visible. Before 2016, political identity was one part of your life. After 2016, political identity became your entire identity. Every issue, every relationship, every decision filtered through partisan loyalty. Not because voters chose tribalism, because algorithms rewarded tribalism. And here's the calculation that makes it irreversible. Filter bubbles isolate you in one reality. Algorithms radicalize you within that reality. Opposing perspectives become not just wrong, but evil. And once the other side is evil, there's no path back to cooperation. 2016 election results. 74% of Republicans questioned the fairness of the election when Trump won. Wait, Trump won. But 3/4 of Republicans still doubted election fairness. Not because the election was stolen, because trust in the democratic process collapsed. Democrats too. Before the 2016 election, 14% of Democrats weren't confident in election results. After Trump won, 28%. Doubled. The losing party stopped trusting elections. And once you stop trusting elections, democracy stops functioning. This is where the moral collapse becomes permanent. Democracy depends on losers accepting results. But after 2016, losing parties stopped accepting results. Not because elections were rigged, because algorithms convinced them elections were rigged. And here's what makes it different from past polarization. 1960s, Vietnam War, civil rights. Intense polarization, but polarization centered on specific issues. Once those issues resolved, polarization decreased. 2016 polarization doesn't center on issues. It centers on identity. The new divide isn't liberal versus conservative. It's nationalist versus globalist. White identity versus multiculturalism. Rural versus urban. College-educated versus non-college. These aren't policy disagreements. These are identity conflicts. And identity conflicts don't resolve through compromise. They resolve through victory or defeat. This is where the human cost becomes generational. Americans under 30 in 2016, their first presidential election. They've never experienced democracy without algorithmic manipulation. Filter bubbles, foreign interference, tribalism. They think this is normal. They don't know democracy used to function differently. And they're more polarized than their parents. Gen Z Democrats further left than millennial Democrats. Gen Z Republicans further right than millennial Republicans. Each generation more extreme than the last. Not because each generation is angrier, because each generation spends more time on algorithmically curated social media. 2016 didn't create polarization. 2016 locked it in. Before 2016, polarization was reversible. Policies could change. Leaders could compromise. Institutions could adapt. After 2016, polarization became self-reinforcing. Here's the mechanism. Algorithms reward extreme content. Extreme content radicalizes users. Radicalized users demand extreme politicians. Extreme politicians make extreme policies. Extreme policies further polarize voters. Polarized voters engage more with extreme content. Cycle repeats. And every iteration makes it worse. 2016, 45% of Republicans view Democrats as a threat. 2018, higher. 2020, higher still. 2022, highest ever recorded. The trajectory only goes one direction. Because the algorithm that drives polarization never stops optimizing for engagement. This is what 2016 cost democracy. Not an election, not a policy, not a scandal. The shared reality required for democratic governance. Before 2016, Americans lived in the same country with different opinions. After 2016, Americans lived in different realities that couldn't communicate. Red America and Blue America stopped sharing facts, stopped sharing values, stopped sharing goals. They didn't just disagree. They stopped speaking the same language. And here's why it's permanent. Reversing polarization requires platforms changing algorithms to deprioritize extreme content. But that reduces engagement and revenue. Politicians moderating their rhetoric. But that loses them primary elections. Voters seeking out opposing perspectives. But that causes cognitive discomfort. Media presenting both sides fairly. But that loses them their tribal audience. None of these will happen, because the incentives all point toward more polarization, not less. Platforms profit from engagement. Politicians win through tribalism. Voters retreat into filter bubbles. Media feeds confirmation bias. The system rewards polarization at every level. And once a system rewards polarization, polarization becomes permanent. Not because people want to be divided, because the structures that govern political communication make division inevitable. 2016 to 2026, 10 years. Polarization didn't decrease, didn't stabilize, didn't plateau. It accelerated, every year worse than the last. Every election more divided than the previous. Every generation more tribal than their parents. This is what 2016 revealed. American democracy wasn't destroyed in one election. It was reprogrammed. The algorithm that prioritizes engagement over truth. The filter bubbles that isolate tribes in separate realities. The radicalization pipeline that turns casual users into extremists. The platform incentives that reward division over unity. All of it locked in place in 2016. And here's the calculation voters still don't understand. You think you're choosing your political beliefs, but the algorithm chose them for you. It showed you content designed to radicalize you. You engaged, so it showed you more. You engaged again, so it showed you even more. And now you're convinced the other side is evil, dangerous, a threat to everything you value. Not because you investigated and concluded that independently, because the algorithm trained you to believe it. This is what 2016 cost, not Republicans, not Democrats, everyone. The shared reality, the common ground, the possibility of compromise. All of it sacrificed to an algorithm that profits from division. And the algorithm is still running, still dividing, still radicalizing. Still destroying the social cohesion required for democracy to function. Because polarization is profitable, and profit is permanent. January 20th, 2021. 5 years after the algorithm changed, Donald Trump leaves office. Joe Biden sworn in as president. Democracy survives. Transfer of power happens. Crisis averted. Right? Wrong. Because removing Trump didn't remove what made Trump possible. The algorithms, the filter bubbles, the radicalization pipelines, the foreign interference vulnerabilities, all still operational, all still optimizing for engagement over truth, all still destroying the shared reality democracy requires. This is where the calculation becomes permanent. January 6th, 2021. 2 weeks before Trump leaves office, his supporters storm the United States Capitol. 5 people die, 140 police officers injured. Chambers evacuated, electoral certification delayed, not spontaneous. Organized on social media platforms. Facebook groups, Twitter threads, YouTube videos, Parler posts. The platforms that radicalized voters in 2016 enabled insurrection in 2021. And here's what makes it irreversible. Over 1,000 participants in the January 6th attack have been charged. Over 600 pled guilty. But the platforms that coordinated the attack faced no criminal liability. No executives arrested. No companies shut down. No systematic reforms implemented. Because platforms aren't responsible for user content. Even when user content plans insurrection, But this is where the systemic failure becomes visible. Trump personally pressured state officials to overturn election results, filed dozens of lawsuits challenging vote counts. All failed. Refused to publicly concede defeat. And 3/4 of Trump supporters believed he was the rightful winner of the election he lost. Not because the evidence supported them, because the algorithm confirmed their beliefs. This is what 2016 created. A democracy where losing parties don't accept results. Not because elections are rigged, because platforms convince them elections are rigged. And here's the calculation that makes it permanent. Between 2016 and 2019, more than half of Americans said Trump had little or no respect for democratic institutions. But partisans split on that question. 92% of Democrats agreed. 12% of Republicans agreed. Same country, same president, same actions. Completely opposite perceptions. Not because one side lied and the other told truth. Because each side lived in algorithmically curated realities that showed them different facts. 2022, 6 years after 2016. Promising signs, according to experts. January 6th prosecutions proceeding. 2022 elections occur without major incident. But the fundamental political dynamics that led to democratic erosion haven't changed. A major political party remains uncommitted to accepting legitimate electoral defeat. And as long as that's true, democracy cannot be described as secure. This is where the generational damage becomes visible. State legislatures pass laws reducing voters' access to ballots, politicize election administration, gerrymander districts to foreclose electoral competition. Not in response to fraud. There was no widespread fraud. In response to algorithmic radicalization that convinced voters fraud occurred. The platform created the belief. The belief created the policy. The policy weakened democracy. And here's what makes it permanent. Hyperpartisanship and gridlock leave Congress unable to provide checks on executive and judicial power. The Supreme Court increases its authority over election adjudication, narrows voting rights protections, supports politicization of executive branch administration. Every institution that could fix the system is captured by the polarization the system created. This is what 2016 revealed about democracy. Democratic backsliding doesn't require a coup. It requires systematic erosion of institutions combined with algorithmic radicalization of voters. Platforms radicalize voters. Radicalized voters elect extremists. Extremists weaken institutions. Weakened institutions can't regulate platforms. The cycle completes. But this is where it gets worse. 2019. UK Parliament report on Facebook and democracy. Conclusion. Democracy is at risk from the malicious and relentless targeting of citizens with disinformation and personalized dark adverts from unidentifiable sources, delivered through the major social media platforms we use every day. The report called for regulation, oversight, accountability. 7 years after 2016, none implemented. Not in the UK, not in the US, not anywhere with meaningful enforcement. Because regulating platforms requires political will. But political will comes from politicians. And politicians are elected through platforms. So politicians who try to regulate platforms lose elections to politicians who exploit platforms. The system protects itself. This is where the calculation becomes global. 2020, 14th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. Democracy weakening worldwide, not strengthening. And social media platforms accelerate the decline. Because authoritarian governments learned from 2016. Algorithmic manipulation works. Foreign interference works. Radicalization works. Every authoritarian regime now deploys the tactics Russia pioneered in 2016. And democratic governments can't counter it. Because democratic governments are constrained by free speech protections, due process, rule of law. Authoritarian governments face no such constraints. They can deploy algorithmic manipulation without oversight, without transparency, without consequences. Democracy fights with one hand tied behind its back. Authoritarianism fights with every weapon available. This is what 2016 cost. Not just American democracy, global democracy. The playbook that worked in 2016 became the template for undermining democracy everywhere. And platforms that enabled it expanded globally. More users, more countries, more languages, more opportunities for manipulation. 2024, Latin America. Governments implement algorithmic systems for public administration, healthcare, criminal justice, social services, all automated. But the algorithms come from private corporations, Microsoft, Google, Meta. No regulatory frameworks, no independent oversight, no transparency in evaluation or audit processes. Corporate algorithms govern citizens, and citizens have no recourse when algorithms violate their rights. This is where the moral collapse becomes permanent. Algorithmic governance without accountability. Algorithmic radicalization without consequences. Algorithmic manipulation without regulation. The system that broke democracy in 2016 now governs every aspect of life. Healthcare decisions, criminal sentencing, credit scores, employment screening, news consumption. All determined by algorithms optimized for corporate profit, not public welfare. And here's what makes it irreversible. Once algorithms govern, humans lose the capacity to govern. Because algorithmic systems are opaque, complex, proprietary. Citizens can't audit them. Journalists can't investigate them. Governments can't regulate them. The black box that decides who sees what news also decides who gets health care, who goes to prison, who gets hired. And the black box answers to no one. This is what 2016 revealed about the future. Democracy depends on human accountability, but algorithmic systems eliminate accountability. Who's responsible when an algorithm radicalizes someone? The platform? The programmer? The user? The advertiser? Nobody knows. So nobody is held accountable. And this guarantees the cycle continues. Platforms radicalize voters with impunity. Radicalized voters weaken democracy. Weakened democracy can't regulate platforms. Unregulated platforms radicalize more voters. 2026. 10 years after 2016. Democracy more polarized than 2016. Trust in institutions lower than 2016. Media more fragmented than 2016. Foreign interference more sophisticated than 2016. Algorithmic manipulation more pervasive than 2016. Nothing improved. Nothing stabilized. Nothing recovered. Because the systems that broke democracy in 2016 are still running. Still optimizing for engagement, still prioritizing profit over truth, still destroying the shared reality democracy requires. This is where the human cost becomes generational. Children born in 2016 are 10 years old in 2026. They've never experienced democracy without algorithmic manipulation. They don't know elections used to be accepted by losing parties. They don't know journalism used to be trusted. They don't know political opponents used to govern together. This generation thinks polarization is normal. Insurrection is normal. Election denial is normal. Because it's all they've ever known. And a generation that thinks democratic erosion is normal won't fight to restore democracy. They'll adapt to authoritarianism instead. This is what 2016 cost. Not one election. Not 4 years of Trump. Not a single scandal. The belief that democracy is permanent. Democracy isn't permanent. Democracy is fragile. And every year since 2016 has made it more fragile. Because the algorithm that broke never stopped running. It's still prioritizing engagement over truth. Emotion over information. Polarization over unity. Every election since 2016 has been shaped by the same forces. Every crisis since 2016 has been amplified by the same platforms. Every authoritarian regime has learned from the same playbook. And here's the calculation that makes it permanent. Fixing this requires platforms to deprioritize engagement, which reduces revenue, requires politicians to reject algorithmic manipulation, which loses them elections, requires voters to seek opposing views, which creates cognitive discomfort, requires journalists to present nuanced truth, which loses them audience. None of these will happen, because every incentive points toward more polarization, not less. This is what 2016 revealed. Democracy doesn't die in one event. Democracy dies through 1,000 cuts. An algorithm change here, a radicalization pipeline there, a filter bubble, a foreign interference campaign, a weakened institution, a normalized lie. Each cut small, each cut survivable, until you realize you've bled out. 2026. The algorithm that changed in January 2016 is still running, still curating your feed, still radicalizing your neighbors, still dividing your country. Trump came and went. The algorithm remains. And the algorithm doesn't care about democracy. It only cares that you keep scrolling, because your attention is profitable. And profit is the only thing that matters. Not truth, not unity, not democracy, just profit. And as long as polarization is profitable, polarization is permanent.